Today's shir is dedicated by Gail and Marty Elsand as an aliyat neshama for Rav Nachman ben Yitzchak Halevi Zal Sigmund Epstein on the occasion of his 55th yortzeit, the 21st of Tevet. May all of the learning today be aliyat nishmato. Obviously, yesterday was an important day in the United States, perhaps for Israel as well, the inauguration of President Trump. But I want to digress a little today from our regular topic, although I'm not sure what our regular topic is yet. We're kind of in transition. And I want to speak a little bit about the hostage deal, the idea of releasing terrorists in exchange for the chatufim at a ratio of, like 1 to 1,000, whatever it's going to be. And I do want to discuss it halachically in terms of what are these sources. Now, again, obviously, Netanyahu probably does consult with rabbis if for no reason than his need to have a coalition. But obviously, he does not consider any psak halacha binding. But in terms of halacha, it's interesting to understand what would halacha say about these types of deals, which, by the way, this is obviously not the first time Israel has done this. In fact, October 7 was generated by Sinwar being released with Gilad Shalit and the like. And although it's an amazing thing, Israel's official policy is we don't negotiate with terrorists. Unofficially, they negotiate with terrorists all the time. And not only to get back people who are alive, but even to get back bodies of dead people. And we'll talk about that prat as well. But the question is, what does the halacha say? So just a few things to keep in mind. First of all, first and foremost, there's obviously a very great mitzvah called pidyon shvuyim, the ransoming of captives. Pidyon shvuyim is considered to be what is called a mitzvah rabbah, a great mitzvah. It is so significant that we even sell a shul or sell a sefer Torah in order to get the ability to ransom shvuyim. And as the Rambam explains, based on the Gemara in Bava Basra, people in captivity can suffer from a million different things. Obviously, their lives are in danger. A woman could be raped. Men could be sexually abused. There could be mutilation. There could be starvation. There could be beatings. Unfortunately, all of these things have happened in the past, and even now they have happened. So obviously, there's a tremendous, tremendous mitzvah to do what we can to rescue people who are in that very tragic and unfortunate situation. The agmas nefesh that they've gone through and the agmas nefesh of their families is something that tears at the heart of any sensitive, caring person, particularly, really, that's how Jews feel. Jews especially feel this rachamim, and especially in Eretz Yisrael, which is a small country, and everybody knows somebody who knows somebody, meaning you're not that many degrees removed from a family that actually suffered losses or has relatives who are in captivity. So we start off with the obvious proposition that obviously there's a great, great, great mitzvah to try to bring these people home and unite them with their family. I think there's no machlokas about that. Problem is, at what cost? So let's start off with a Mishnah in Maseches Gittin, in the 4th perek, that many consider to be the key to the halachic understanding of the sugya. And that is the Mishnah enumerates a number of rabbinic enactments because of tikkun olam. Tikkun olam was not invented by the Reform movement, although they love to use the phrase tikkun olam. Tikkun olam does appear in the Mishnah and in the Gemara, and it refers to rabbinic enactments for the betterment and protection of society. So it'll often say, we do X, Y, and Z because this is a tikkun, this is something that's of positive benefit to society. And the benefit could be different in every case, meaning tikkun olam is not a single idea. It's a general concept, and what it means has to be fleshed out in each individual case. So among the tikkun olams that the Mishnah mentions is the following. Ein podin es hashvuyin yeser michdei demehen. We do not redeem captives for more than their value, mipnei tikkun olam. So the first question we have, just reading the sentence, what do you mean more than their value. The value of a human being is infinite. Trillions of dollars, quadrillions of dollars. What do you mean more than their value? Well, this has a very, very narrow technical meaning, and that is in a slave market, human beings had a value, depending on your age, your skill, your strength, your life expectancy, your health. And therefore, everybody has a hypothetical value. That's not my value of my neshama, that's not my spiritual value, but it's my economic value. So consequently, when we redeem captives, when communities have an obligation to redeem captives, we don't pay ransoms in excess of their economic value as a slave. So if a person's economic value based on the slave blue book, just like cars have a blue book, I guess in the slave blue book, the person would go on the market for $50,000, so we pay up to $50,000, but if they ask for $1 million, we don't do it. And the reason that's given is, this limitation is a tikkun olam. Now, it doesn't explain what that is. So the Gemara offers two possibilities regarding what the tikkun olam is. Possibility number one is duchka ditzibura, in order to protect the public treasury. A communal budget has to do a lot of things. They have to build roads, they have to build schools, they have to have hospitals, they have to have yeshivos and batei medrash, they have to have medical care and the like. If every kidnapper could demand unlimited claims for pikuach nefesh, this would bankrupt communities, and they would not be able to perform their functions. So because of duchka ditzibora, the Chachamim put a limit on what we pay for ransoming hostages. Now, according to that interpretation, stopping right there, it turns out that this is only a limitation on public ransoms. Meaning, let's say, God forbid, somebody had their child kidnapped and they happen to be wealthy. This happened all the time. And this is not a Hamas type of kidnapping. This is a plain money kidnapping, where somebody says, you have to give $10 million or $1 million by Monday morning, or your child is going to be killed. Now, normally, if the father has the money, generally speaking, or the parents have the money, they'll come up with it. Would halacha prohibit it? So, if the concern is duchka ditzibora, private people who want to come up with the money can do whatever they want. It's their money to spend. And if they want to use their money to save a child or ransom a hostage, they would have that right. That's pshat number one. But pshat number two in the Tikkun Olam is very different. Pshat number two is, the Chachamim did not want to incentivize hostage taking. And the fear would be that if we would give in to unlimited demands, that would encourage further such activity in the future. And as a result, we will not pay excessive ransoms. Now, lest it will encourage future hostage takings against the public at a later time. Halachically, we actually paskin like that second reason, and that actually means, even though a parent wouldn't listen, and I'm not saying a parent will comply with this halacha, that it actually means that even a private citizen is not supposed to pay excessive ransoms. Again, as I say, most parents, I probably would include myself as well, might not even keep that halacha because it's your child, but as a matter of technical halacha, you don't give in to these demands because you are encouraging hostage taking and kidnapping in the future. Now, the truth of the matter is, if you took that to its extreme, we shouldn't even pay up to their slave value, meaning why should I pay him $50,000? But apparently, the Chachamim didn't want to go cold turkey and simply abandon the kidnapped victim, so they said there'll be a limit, but hopefully it won't be profitable enough to keep on doing it. Now, we have one famous example in history where this halacha was actually applied, and this was to the great Rabbi Meir of Rothenburg. Rothenburg is a city in Germany. In Hebrew, we pronounce it Rutenburg. That's the name. The name is from that. And he is called Maharam mi Rutenburg. Moreno Rav Meir Rothenburg. He is known primarily, it's a funny thing, he is known as the Rebbe of the Rush, Rabbeinu Usher, who is one of the greatest of the Rishonim. But the truth is, Marami Rothenburg was not just the Rebbe of the Rush. Marami Rothenburg was the Gadol Hador Mamish in Germany in the 1200s. And he was, in those days, there was no country Germany per se. There were essentially a bunch of city-states, Bavaria, Bohemia, Saxony, and the like. And Marami Rothenburg was simply taken hostage by a duke and just held for money. Basically, hey, you want your rabbi back? Pay us whatever it is, 1,000,000 ducats, whatever the currency was. And Rabbeinu Usher, his own Talmud, wanted to raise the money to ransom him because Rabbeinu Usher took the halachic position that the limitation of the Mishnah does not apply to a great and exceptional Talmud Chacham. Might call it the great Talmud Chacham exception, in which we get him back no matter what. But it's interesting, Rav Meir of Rothenburg did not agree with the great Talmud Chacham exception. So he told the Rosh, hey, listen, you want to ransom me against my will because you consider me a great Talmud Chacham. So if you consider me a great Talmud Chacham, how can you disagree with my psak that I can't be ransomed? So as a result, Marami Rothenburg remains in this imprisonment for 7 years. Now, then he died. He was not killed. He died. He died of old age, or maybe the conditions there created illness. Now, it wasn't as bad as you might think. He wasn't thrown into a hole. It was more or less under castle arrest. He couldn't leave this castle. And he was allowed to have Talmidim who came. So he actually gave shiurim, and he was able to write. Some of his svarim are from his imprisonment. But I don't know, was there a minyan? Did he hear shofar? No, we don't really know all the conditions. But for 7 years, he could not leave this castle. And he insisted that the community not ransom him because the ransom was excessive. And he applied the Mishnah in Gittin, Ein podin es hashvuyin, yoser michtei demeyem, and he insisted. When he died, the Duke refused to release the body for burial unless a huge ransom was paid. At this point, Rabbeinu Usher maintained his Rebbe died. He was no longer bound by the Rebbe's decision. And he also combined it with the idea that maybe a private person could do it. And he got a very rich gevir to pay the ransom on the condition that when the gevir dies, he will be buried next to Marami Rothenburg. Kachave, the body was released. The body was buried. There's still a Beis HaKvarot in Rothenburg.
It was in Worms.
It was buried in Worms. And the next to him is the guy who at least was. Things have got moved, who ransomed him. This is Marami. So this is a famous case where the halacha was actually applied, halacha lemaisa. By the way, just as a little aside, of the kinos of Tisha B'Av, which are mainly about the Beis Hamikdash, but towards the very end, there is a kina written by Marami Rothenburg over the witnessing of the burning of 24 wagon loads of the Gemara in France. And this virtually destroyed almost all of the Talmud. Remember, this is before printing. So these are 24 wagon loads of handwritten manuscripts. This basically, in fact, that basically destroyed Torah in France. France was no longer a Makam Torah. France had been a tremendous Makam Torah. Rashi, the Balei HaTosfos were between Germany and France, Rabbeinu Tam, they all were French. The event that kind of made it impossible to essentially learn Torah in France anymore was the Serefat HaTalmud, and because of some papal decrees. And Marami Rothenburg, he was probably not an eyewitness to it, but he wrote a lamentation about the Torah being destroyed, and how HaKadosh Baruch Hu and Klal Yisrael are crying and bereft. And of course, he included in it as well the deaths of the living Sifrei Torah, the Talmidei Chachamim, who died in crusades and various other things. So it actually is towards the end of the kinos on Tisha B'Av. So we move a little away from the Beis Hamikdash and we focus on other tragedies that happens. Okay, so now it turns out like this. Some poskim have taken the position that based on the principle in Gittin of Tikkun Olam, that we don't ransom hostages for more than their basic economic value, it is actually prohibited to pay either monetary ransom and kal v'chomer releasing of terrorists. Because you have to understand, releasing of terrorists has two problems, although they're related. One is you're incentivizing future hostage takings. Because people like Hamas or other people can just say, hey, if every time we kidnap a Gilad Shalit, we can get 1,000 of our people back, let's start kidnapping. There's a second problem, which is not the same problem, and that is you're releasing back into the population people who have murdered and are likely to murder again. So that's a separate issue. There's the incentivization of kidnappings, and there is the danger of releasing rotzchim back into the population. I mean, I understand. I didn't check the list, but I understand that, for example, Rav Eitam Henkin and his Rebbetzin were brutally murdered a few years ago, and I understand that the guy that was convicted of their murder is on a release list. People, it's not like people kill, I mean, no matter what, but it's not like they killed, 50 years ago and they're getting out. I mean, these are people who did their Maaseh, 2 or 3 years ago. And they're getting out without suffering any type of significant punishment. In a way, it makes you almost support Ben Gvir that, kill them right away so they're not around to be released for deals and the like. I think it's very legitimate. A terrorist is a murderer, and a murderer can be executed. But be it as it may, I'm not sure if Israel's cheshbon is b'dafka keep them so we have leverage for deals. I'm not sure what's going through people's minds. But be it as it may, this is Shita number one. Shita number one basically says you cannot make a deal that will pose dangers to the public, even if it's a matter of saving existing hostages. This is the Tikkun Olam. This is the Takana of Chazal, that we're not podeh shvuyim yeser michtei demeim for that particular reason. And this is even worse than paying monetary ransom. When you pay monetary ransom, maybe you're creating incentives for kidnapping. Here, you're actually putting the murderers back into the population. And even if Israel says, or whatever, well, we have our army, we have our police, we have our Shin Bet, we will prevent it from happening. Well, it's true, it is true, and we don't always realize this, that for every successful terrorist attack, there are around 20 that were thwarted. So Lamaisa, things could be a lot worse than we might imagine, b'chastei Hashem. But still, people get through, things get through, and people who murdered are likely to murder again. They didn't do tshuva, they didn't become from peace-loving people in their experiment. By the way, you may recall a famous story that Jonathan Rosenblum often recounts about some terrorist who had been in Israeli prison a very, very long time, and his guard said, why do you still believe in your cause? You see our army is so much bigger than yours, so much stronger than yours, your small change. He says, so eventually the guy got out, and the guy was asked in an interview, he says, how did you maintain faith in, I think Al Jazeera, how did you maintain faith in your cause in those 25 years of imprisonment? He said, listen to this is horrendous.
The matzah store?
The matzah store, yeah. He said, you're right, there were many times I gave up. But then I saw my guard eating bread during Pesach. And I said to him, he says, what are you eating bread? It's your holiday, you're not allowed to eat bread. And the guard said, who cares about things that happened, 5,000 or 4,000 years ago? I don't care about that stuff. So the terrorist said, then I knew we would win because we care about what happened thousands of years ago. And they don't. Sad, tragic, but there's something to learn. May oivai tachimeni, David HaMelech says, which means we can sometimes learn things from the enemy. The enemy employs its passions for evil and destruction, but they have a passion. We have to take the passion for that which is good and that which is true, but we need to take the passion. We need to have the care. We need to care enough about this. So this is position number one. Now, yeah.
Which opinions, if there are any, in halacha or Breitowitz, have to do with releasing them?
Yeah, so please, I'm in the middle of a shir, so I mean, this is what this is what I'm talking about, right?
I know.
Okay.
What?
He who is patient will be rewarded. I mean, I said there are three. I started the classes. There are three opinions. I just finished opinion number one.
Right.
That means there's a 2 and there's a 3. Okay, so the 2 and the 3 are going to address what you're raising. Okay. Okay. Opinion number 2. And the truth of the matter is, this has been followed by many, many Gedolim, most notably Rav Ovadia Yosef, going back much earlier with Gilad Shalit. And Rav Ovadia says that Rav Elyashiv agreed to him. Although I did not find Rav Elyashiv say one thing or the other, but Rav Ovadia says that Rav Elyashiv agreed. And the present Rav Harashi, for the Sfardi Rav Harashi, Rav Yitzchak Yosef, who's Rav Ovadia's son, takes the very same position, and that is, they base this on a Tosfos in Gittin that changes the sugya lagamre. Tosfos in Gittin, in one answer, suggests that the whole limitation of not paying excessive ransoms only applies where the hostage's life is not in danger, in a non-pikuach nefesh situation. An example would be Marami Rittenberg. Marami Rittenberg, apparently, they were not threatening to kill him. I mean, they held him till he died, meaning, as strange as it was not a life-threatening situation. So then and only then do we say, you got to let him sit in order not to hurt the public in the long run. But, says Tosfos, this is Tosfos, says Tosfos, when someone's life is in danger, when someone could be killed any moment in time, Ein davor omed mishum pikuach nefesh. There is nothing other than avodah zarah, the 3 big averos, avodah zarah, murder, and sexual immorality, but everything else we do to save lives. So now this changes the picture totally, because it turns out, according to that, situations like Hamas have nothing to do with the sugya in Maseches Gittin. Maseches Gittin, they're talking about kidnappers that are just holding people for money, and they're not even threatening to kill. You're just going to hold the person indefinitely. So B'chi Gavna, the Mishnah says, we don't pay excessive ransoms. But somebody whose life is on the line, and Rahman al-Islam, many have already been killed, and any second, God forbid, people can be killed. So in such a situation, pikuach nefesh overrides everything. Now, I do want to point out right off the bat that this is a machlokes rishonim. Tosfos, in one answer, does say pikuach nefesh overrides the tikkun olam. The Ramban says no. The Ramban says even if they're going to die, you don't do it. So the Ramban is position number 1. Tosfos is position number 2. It seems that in a way, I don't want to call it automatically a Dati Leomi versus Haredi split. I don't want to put it that way, although it seems to be almost that way. That is, much of the Dati Leomi poskim take a much harder line position consistent with Shita number 1, that we don't give in because you're endangering future people. Many Haredi poskim, I mentioned Rav Ovadia Yosef, who's Sfardi, but Sfardi Haredi, and Rav Elyashiv, these are earlier cases, they did say pikuach nefesh is paramount. Now, one might argue, well, wait a second. You're telling me we should get the hostages home because of their pikuach nefesh. What about the danger to life that we're causing by the release? So here, Rav Ovadia invoked a principle, and you could debate this principle, that says, Ein safek motzi midei vadai. The doubt cannot override the present certainty. Meaning, right now, this minute, we have 100, whatever number we have, we hope it's that many, whose lives are in a clear and present danger. We have a way of saving them. You're telling me, well, but if I save them by releasing terrorists or paying excessive ransoms, I am possibly endangering. That's a suffix, meaning to say, maybe yeah, maybe not, maybe the security will be improved, the army, the borders, etc. Maybe Trump gave Netanyahu reshut to kind of continue destroying Hamas after the hostages are released. Meaning, of course, he wasn't talking about this, he's not alive, but his basic idea was, you got to deal with the present certainty of pikuach nefesh, and you ignore the long-term risks of pikuach nefesh. And even though the Mishnah in Gittin seems to say that we don't pay the excessive ransoms, we don't give in, but Rav Ovadia paskins, like the Tosfos in Gittin, that's only talking about a very rare situation, actually, where a life is not being threatened. Now, again, that's very, very rare. I mean, even in kidnappings for money, they usually give a deadline. They say, money or we'll kill, So the truth of the matter is, Rav Ovadia is almost marginalizing the whole rule of not giving in because he limits it to a situation where no life is being endangered. And in the vast majority, certainly in political hostage-taking, lives are very much in danger. And even in, just plain private kidnapping, often a life is going to be threatened because they'll give deadlines. The kidnapper doesn't want to schlep around somebody for 10, 20 years, whatever it would be. So they're usually going to kill. All right. So according to Rav Ovadia, there is no problem. I mean, obviously there's an emotional problem, and obviously it's very, very painful. But halachically, these types of deals would be permitted. Now, let me mention a shita number 3 in this whole area. And shita number 3 leads to the same conclusion as shita number 1. Don't give in. But they do it through a different paradigm. And this was something that Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky had said many, many years ago. And more recently, Rav Hershel Schachter at YU took the same position. And that is, this should not be viewed, hostage-taking should not be viewed as kidnapping. Rather, this is an act of war. We're dealing with milchama. And remember, there are 2 types of wars in halacha. There is what is called milchemes mitzvah. There is what is called a mitzvah war, a mandatory war. And there is what is called optional wars. Now, a mandatory war, a mitzvah war, the Rambam says there are 3 types of mitzvah wars. One is the war against Amalek, which does not exist as a separate nation today. The other is a war against the 7 indigenous nations who inhabited Canaan, and that too does not apply. So 2 of the 3 categories are simply not applicable today. But there is a category 3 of Milchemet Mitzvah that very sadly is still very relevant today, and that is L'hoshia es Yisrael miyad tsar, to save the Jewish people from an enemy that is seeking their destruction. A war of defense against an enemy who is trying to destroy us. That is a milchemes mitzvah, even bisman hazeh. Now, just as an aside, you may wonder, what is a milchemet reshut? What is an optional war? So this will sound very, very strange. An optional war is actually a war of expansion. We simply want to acquire an oil field in Saudi Arabia. Now, you might be a little shocked. What do you mean? Jewish law permits an aggressive, non-defensive war of expansion? That sounds pretty bad. So the truth of the matter is, the conditions for that are so limited. They require a halachic melech. They require a decision of the Sanhedrin, which we don't have. and they require prophetic confirmation. In other words, God has to give you permission through the Urim, the Tumim, the Kohen Gadol's breastplate. So de facto, therefore, there is no halachic legitimacy, bisman hazeh, for a war, an aggressive war of expansion. Can't do it. The only halachic legitimacy of any war is the paradigm of milchemet mitzvah. And of the categories of milchemet mitzvah, all we have is that third category, to defend ourselves against enemies. Now, that may include preemptive strikes, meaning that doesn't mean we have to wait. We can go into Lebanon, things like that. But all of it has to be in the nature of defending against an enemy, and every single war that Israel has fought, including 1948, was a defensive war. Remember, unlike the American Revolution, let's say, that in which the war established the State of Israel, that's absolutely not the case. The State of Israel had been established before the war. It was the establishment of the state that caused a war of independence, which was defending ourselves from armies that tried to destroy us the very first minute of the existence of the state. So halachically, it's a milchemes mitzvah. Now, I'll talk about Charedim and the draft a little later. I'll get to that, although it's not my topic. But I just want to mention what Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky said and what Herschel Schechter said. They said, when there's a milchemes mitzvah, and hostage-taking is one of the weapons that the enemies are using in waging that war. He says, in a war, the goal of the Torah is to destroy the enemy. I don't mean necessarily kill the enemy, unless it's Amalek, you don't have to kill them, but to defeat the enemy, to be sure that they can't continue to do what they're doing. So as a result, there's no room for giving in to terrorism and the like, because you're emboldening an enemy. Meaning, the Mishnah is dealing with private kidnapping, so to speak. When you're dealing with war, you are mechuyev to destroy the enemy. And anything that builds up the enemy is against the mitzvah of waging war. The mitzvah of waging war says there's a mitzvah to wage war. Consequently, you can't compromise. You can't give in. So the point I'm making is, this leads to the same conclusion as the first view, but in a different way. Not applying the tikkun olam of pidyon shvuyim, but looking at the idea of milchemet mitzvah and the need to defeat an enemy. You may recall, those of you who are older, this was before Entebbe. Now, Entebbe was interesting. Entebbe was a pretend hostage deal, but it turned out to be a rescue, a military rescue effort. In other words, Israel was lulling the terrorists into security by proposing terrorist or prisoner swaps, as they were called. Lamaisa, that didn't happen. What happened instead was the amazing, miraculous military raid that basically rescued all of the chatufim, except an elderly woman had died earlier, not as part of that effort. And of course, Netanyahu's brother, Yoni Netanyahu, Yonatan, who was leading that, was the casualty. But in terms of the ability to pull off this military effort, it really was a miracle. I mean, in quite a literal sense, what had to be done was lamaila min hateva. So Entebbe itself did not involve prisoner releases, although it was on the table. But before that, you might recall, there was a hijacking, and Rav Hutner, the Rosh Yeshiva of Chaim Berlin, was actually on the plane. And there were people who wanted to, I mean, listen, every Jewish life matters, but there were people who especially wanted to raise money to somehow get him off together. I don't know if he would have accepted it or not. But Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky, who was a very close friend of Rav Hutner, was against it. He said, you cannot give in to these demands. This is an enemy that wants to destroy you, and when you encourage them, they'll just do it again and again and again and again. And Rav Yaakov maintains, and this is very hard to say, and it's very hard to hear, that even if it means that the captives are going to die, this is how he compared it to. It is similar to the sacrifices of chayolim. When we wage war against an enemy, we send chayolim to fight against the enemy. We are sending people, tragically, who might be going to their deaths. but this is the cost that the Torah puts on waging a war against the enemy. So the hostages, in a sense, are like involuntary chayolim, meaning, again, I hate to sound callous, and I am really not callous. I'm just describing from a very maybe cold-blooded, objective way, that in a sense, this is part of the cost, Rabbi Yaakov said, of war. Chayolim die, prisoners of war die, or captives die, because giving in will embolden the enemy and create greater dangers. But the point is that both Rav Yaakov and Rav Shechter, who is commenting about the contemporary situation, are disassociating it from the general problem of pidyon shvuyim, because they say when there is milchemes mitzvah, there is a different dynamic in place, and that is milchemes mitzvah. I mean, the very words, a mitzvah to wage war, means mitzvah to defeat the enemy and not empower it. At the same time, however, once you make it a military issue, it actually gets a little more complicated, because you have to look at long-term objectives, meaning, I know nothing about this, but some people are saying that when Trump, who really, I mean, although this was, I mean, when Biden says, this is what he said, 6 months ago, that's actually true. Biden was always calling for these releases. But obviously it was Trump putting pressure that this got to be done before the inauguration. So there are people who say, and again, I'm an ignoramus here, I'm not claiming any knowledge whatsoever, that Trump's pressure, certain maybe assurances were given to Netanyahu, such as, you can resume the battle right away, or you can go after Iran, and we're not going to stop you if you want to bomb their nuclear facilities. So here is the point, meaning the following. If we were simply saying we are releasing the terrorists to get back the hostages, Rav Yaakov would suggest that's a wrong calculus, because you can't endanger the war effort. But if there's something beneath the surface, which I don't know, that it's not just releasing the hostages, but this might be a way in which a long-term nitzachon might be achieved, then it would in fact be justifiable, you see? Because then the general public becomes the chayalim who may face certain risks, because in the long term there'll be a bigger victory. So it's very, very subtle. You have to differentiate between a purely humanitarian calculus, meaning we have to get these people out, which is obviously understandable, but maybe illegitimate in time of war, versus a military strategy calculus, which may in fact mean that this may help the long-term effort. I don't know. All I'm saying is, these are possibilities that people are floating around, and nobody knows what's true and what's not true. The truth of the matter is, one of the lessons here is when Trump got elected, so the euphoria among so many segments of the Jewish people was so great. I mean, it was almost messianic, Mashiach. And then, he walks back a little bit and he puts pressure for these types of deals. And people think, well, is Trump really a friend, or what's going on here? I mean, Trump is still mad that Netanyahu gave Biden congratulations, 4 years ago. It's still bothering him and the like. So the ultimate lesson here is a very simple lesson. Orur hagever sheyiftach b'Hashem. Cursed is the man who puts his trust. Yiftach b'Adam, rather. I'm sorry. Orur ha'adam sheyiftach b'Adam. Baruch hagever sheyiftach b'Hashem. Right. So cursed is the person who puts his trust in man. Al tiftechu bin nedivim, David HaMelech says. Do not trust in princes. So really, Hashem is kind of telling us, yeah, Trump is a good shaliach. He could be a good shaliach, but things can turn on a dime. And our main point is, as the United States currency says, in God we trust. It's too bad Israel's currency doesn't say that. But at least the U.S. coins say, in God we trust. Yeah.
So there's a related problem of sending chayalim in to rescue hostages or to rescue bodies, which has been done. So isn't this money and isn't that terrorism?
Yeah. So let me address two peripheral problems. One is, let's assume you go with Rav Ovadia's position, not 1 and 3, position 2, and you actually do permit releasing the terrorists in order to get back the Chatufim. Let's say you do permit it. Pikuach nefesh. Would that apply to dead bodies? Remember, Israel has released prisoners in the past, not only to get live soldiers back or live prisoners back, live hostages, they've done so to get dead bodies that they could give a Jewish burial to. Now, a Jewish burial is a very, very important thing, to be sure, but it's not pikuach nefesh. So here's the question. If you maintain, of course, that you can't release terrorists even for people who are alive, kal v'chomer, you couldn't do it for dead bodies. But I'm going like the second position. If you go with Rav Ovadia's position, that you would allow doing this for live hostages, is there any conceivable heter to do this for dead people? It's not pikuach nefesh. Yeah, of course it's a great mitzvah, but on the other hand, you're endangering the public in order to get back a dead body. So here, the heter is even more shvach. It's even less clear. But some have developed the following argument. They have actually said, even getting back dead bodies is a matter of pikuach nefesh in the sense of combat morale. One of the things that gives a soldier chizuk and strength is the sense that the army has their back. They will not be abandoned. They will not be abandoned if they're alive, and they will not be abandoned if they're dead. If they know ahead of time that if they're taken or they're killed, no one's going to care about them. So some have argued that that may affect their devotion to their cause, which could ultimately result in pikuach nefesh. It's a very attenuated pikuach nefesh, and in fact, logically, it seems to me, the pikuach nefesh of releasing the terrorists is a much greater risk than the soldier losing his faith, because they're not going to reclaim him if he dies. But nevertheless, some have tried to make the pikuach nefesh argument even there. Now, your question, which goes to the Entebbe raid, now that's a different question. Yeah, the question was that when you let's talk about a rescue mission instead of talking about terrorist release. We're talking about let's send our chayalim to go through and rescue. And what you're doing is, like Entebbe was an example, a miraculous example, and other examples where hostages are freed by the army going in a very, very high-risk, dangerous mission, which may have many casualties, more than whom you're rescuing. Right? You're rescuing 5 people, and you might lose 20 people. Right? Does halacha allow that? Does halacha allow dangerous, high-risk rescue missions, even if they're for the purpose of pikuach nefesh? That is a good question. So I'll tell you this. Both Rabbi Eliezer Waldenberg and Rav Asher Weiss develop an idea that I don't know if it has a solid makor in Chazal. And they've talked of the idea of tafkid, and that is, in any society, there are tafkidim which by their very nature involve endangerment of life. Policeman, fireman, soldier.
Driving a car.
And the argument goes that once you've assumed that tafkid, the halacha does allow you, or maybe even compel you, to risk your life for that mission. Meaning to say, the chiyuvim that the Torah puts on a soldier, on a policeman, on a fireman, are different than the chiyuvim that are placed on a regular person. Now, as I say, in secular law, there's certainly such a concept. That's your job. In halacha, it's not really clear to me that a policeman somehow has more of a heter to risk his life than anyone else. But yet, on the other hand, that is the job. So both Rav Asher Weiss and Rav Oldenburg do say that they are permitted and even mechuyev to assume high-risk operations, because that is the task, that is the tafkid that they have, and a society is permitted to create tafkidim that are called high-risk tafkidim. So that would be the idea there. Yeah,
The phrase you use, tikkun olam,
yeah,
as far as the burial of dead people to endanger others, it's not just the soldier himself, it's the whole community. And we see how important it was. Here, yesterday, a soldier was reburied after 10 and a half years of being held. And it was the whole community, not the whole, but certainly representatives of the whole, that came to the Leviat, that feel that this is what binds us as a community. So the moral, ethical, national implications of this take on a wider role than the specific halacha for a specific person.
yeah. That is a very excellent point. It is a subtle point, and it's not entirely clear how halacha integrates that point. And that is, there are certain attitudes that a society needs to be able to function in a productive and growing way, and that requires a sense of cohesion and a sense of mutual caring. And when a society behaves with abandonment and the like, that can have all sorts of ripple effects and fissures and cracks that in the long run can severely undermine a sense of national consciousness. That's a very, very true, yeah. And ultimately, it could translate into pikuach nefesh in the long run. As I say, yeah,
Translates Hamas
yeah,
by the Indian of
Yeah.
TORAH. He says it's because of society that didn't function properly.
yeah. But again, the specific question is, all of that is very, very true. The question is whether that justifies, releasing terrorists who may, that's going to be the very difficult question you're exposing people to.
I was talking specifically about the burial.
No, I understand that, but I was referring to the context of we're going to release, 1,000 terrorists so we can get back dead bodies so we can bury. I mean, I understand the burial is important. I understand that. The question becomes, would that justify, at what cost? Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah.
Sinwar left instructions sometime before he was killed that if the Israeli soldiers get to prisoners, hostages, they should be killed, like in the case of Hirsch, Poland, Goldberg. So how did these shitas apply to such a situation?
Well, that's the interesting question. In other words, the person himself said that he didn't want to be released.
No, Sinwar said.
Oh, Sinwar said. Yeah. What did you say?
Sinwar gave instructions sometime before he was captured. And
Yes.
killed, that if the Israeli soldiers are surrounding, get to where the hostages are located,
Then kill them right away.
Hamas must kill them. So how do these shitas
Kill the hostages.
Kill the hostages. Yeah. Yeah. Well, again, like the opinions that say that the pikuach nefesh of the hostages is the most important thing, that was Ravaj's opinion, we would actually call off that mission and try to get them freed. Like the other opinions, that we don't compromise the war effort, we got to go on. As hard as this is, I mean, how do you tell a mother about this? How do you tell a mother, your child is going to die because we're not going to compromise with terrorists? It's a very, very difficult thing. On the other hand, I believe that one of the parents actually made the argument that I will scream and cry for my child to be released, and I pray that you don't listen to me. An amazing double set, meaning, yeah, I want my child back no matter what, but you got a war going on, and I can't always let my private desire override that. Very, very difficult. Again, I know I'm maybe sounding academic, objective. I'm just trying to go over shitas here. I do understand how painful it is. And this is why we have such a mixture of happiness and maybe being upset. The happiness of every chatuf being released is everyone has to be very, very much besimcha. On the other hand, there are dangers. And the question is was that the right decision? So, B'ezras Hashem will maybe continue a little bit next week and then go on to another topic. Be well. Take care.